All right, we are jumping in here to module two, the use of theory in business. And theory is one of those words that everybody loves, right? It just conjures up images of excitement and great summers. But we'll hopefully unpack it in a way that helps it make a bit more sense, and specifically in terms of utility. So let's get after it here. Uh, the purpose of what we're trying to do here is explore the role of and the utility of theory in business. So when we think about theory, we might tend to think of like chemistry or biology or anthropology, something like that. But theory has been around in business for well over 100 years, and it's just the idea of a set of interrelated constructs and systems that explain um, what works, what doesn't work, following along with the scientific method of test and observation and results. You can kind of build a cohesive body of knowledge and say, okay, these are things that we know to be true about business. So we're going to explore a little bit about that, where it comes from, and maybe an example of utility, if we can, at the end. So with that in mind, here are the questions. Where does it come from? 100 years of theory in business. Like when someone says the theory of goal setting is, or a particular theory in marketing, where's the origins? How did that get there? And then how is it used? So if you're anything like me, you open up a business textbook, and the worst for me was like finance or economics. You'd read two or three sentences and you go, I have no idea what I just read. And you go back and you read it again, and you're like, yeah, nope. Maybe you get through a paragraph or two, and then you think, gosh, maybe if I could just look for topic sentences or vocabulary, right? Then I can kind of understand it. Totally get it. Theory can be a little bit dry, but I would encourage you that there are a lot of years and a lot of minds and a lot of tests, and results that go into the formation of theory. So perhaps the academicians, the academy, like myself, we can do a better job of making it a bit more fun and relatable, and have obvious, usefulness. But nonetheless, some of that stuff is solid gold, especially when you're in a pinch and you're trying to make a big decision. If you recall the idea in module one about the magnitude of consequences, the bigger that is, the more we want to know the decisions that we're making. So where does theory come from? Let's just go on a little riff here, because really what you're talking about is that the creation of knowledge. Like, where does knowledge on a particular topic come from? So it usually begins with some observations. Somebody has an idea, or they've seen some stuff, and they go, "Man, I wonder why those people do that," or "I wonder why that system works that way." Or you might look at something and there's something that's broken, or there's a problem, and you go, if that's a problem and I want to solve that problem, I need to understand why it's operating in that particular direction. So you can kind of root cause analysis and begin to solve the problem. So observations, not always, but often where it starts. Once there's observations, then you get to research questions. Things like, what role does money play in this? What role does national culture play in this? What role does organizational strategy play in whatever this phenomenon is that I'm looking at? And and that's a really important step, because whatever the research questions you come up with, that begins to kind of give you a bit of tunnel vision, at least what we call the objectivist paradigm, more like empirical research, where you're doing tests and statistics. Once you ask the questions, you're not going to usually answer other questions. You might find more questions to ask, but you're usually going to answer the questions that you set out with. So we have those research questions, and after that we say, beginning with the place of humility, we say, I bet other people have thought about this. I bet other people have observed it, or they've done some studies on it, or something like that. And they've probably published it somewhere, in a book, in a research article, I don't care, on a blog, on a video. I mean, something where there's some literature out there on this topic. After you ask the questions is when you dive in. This is the stereotypical, 5-inch thick book, by candlelight at 2 a.m. Somebody with like really cool little spectacles kind of reading it along. And they're trying to basically build out their understanding of how to deal with the research questions. So that's where a lot of the reading and synthesis comes together, literature review. At this point, you know what everybody else has said. You know what you think, you know what you see. So you go, okay, I've got enough information now where I'm gonna try to generate a hypothesis or maybe a set of hypotheses. You're gonna say, I think that X causes Y. Or you might have, I think X causes Y on Tuesdays, but Y causes Z on Fridays. Whatever it is, you're saying this is what I believe to be true based on the literature and based on my observation. Now it gets fun. Now we can actually build, design some research to test and see. Every hypothesis test is basically the same question. Was I right? Was I right? Is there evidence to suggest it? Is there probability? You've heard of like a P of less than 0.05. Am I 95% or more confident that I was right in my hypothesis? So then we test it. Scientific method, observation, replication. I won't get into all that right here. It's probably a different class, but there's a whole science, research methods behind how we determine the best way to test a hypothesis. And then after we've tested it, there's a whole science behind where could I have gone wrong. But at this point, we test the hypothesis. After that, we know if we were right or if we were wrong with our hypothesis. And then we describe on every research paper you ever see, you'll see a couple sections at the end, implications and limitations. The implications are, okay, so it looks like I was right, and here's what that means. Or it looks like I was wrong, and here's what that means. So it's kind of this is how it would matter to a practicing, like in my field in management, a practicing manager or somebody who's, a marketing executive or something like that. There's also a really important question on limitations. This is only one study so far. The limitations are, okay, guys, we found support for the hypothesis, like we think we're right, but we only tested it on this one group of people, or we only tested it in the year 2022, or we only tested it with this technology. So they start to put boundary conditions. We know this is true in this situation. There's other situations. That's what's called external validity. Or we say, we know this is true, but our research design wasn't super robust. Like it wasn't a really awesome research. Coming out of the coronavirus pandemic, there's all kinds of studies that were going on. And if you didn't have the ability to know the difference between strong and weak internal validity, the importance of random assignment, the importance of longitudinal studies, stuff like that, that you couldn't really know like what's real, what's not real, what's good research. That's what you'll find for a good author anyway. That's what you'll find in the limitation section. We know it's true, but don't take it to the bank because there are these limitations. So let me pause for a minute because this is where it gets super fun and recap. This started with somebody seeing a phenomenon going, okay, that's interesting, asking some questions, doing a ton of reading, interviews, learning about it, building a hypothesis. I think here's the cause or the explanation, testing the hypothesis, and then finding the results. Okay, so are we done? No, we're not done yet. The limitation on every study has limitations, right? The limitations mean that we're not just going to take it to the bank, right? When we say business theory, we don't mean a business paper. We mean business theory. What is that? It suggests more tests. So, well, yes, it worked, and that was September. Let's test it again in January. Let's test it again in the summer. And let's test it on a different sample. Let's test it with different types of people. So we have replication, which means we do the same study over and over and over and over. So if we find results in study 1 and we don't find results in study 2, 3, 4, and 5, we go, probably nothing there. But if we have replication, yep, it seems to be true every time. Then we switch to the next, like the big papa here, which is convergence. Do we have different types of studies designed differently, asking the same question, and do they all converge on the same results? So we test the hypothesis different, or we measure it different, or like I said, different types of people, different frequencies, whatever it is. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we're starting to build confidence that we might be onto something because we tested a hypothesis, we found support, we replicated that multiple times, and then we tested it in different ways, different groups of people, and even different researchers, not all the same researcher or group, but different researchers in different fields all converged to this tipping point of, yep, we can now say with pretty solid confidence that X usually causes Y. And here's how it happens. At some point, when there's enough convergence, there's enough studies out there, somebody will conduct what's called a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is kind of the gold standard in some ways of what we know about a concept. Meta, obviously thinking big, meta-analysis, big analysis. A meta-analysis is a study of studies. So a meta-analysis doesn't go out and get new data. A meta-analysis looks at all the studies that were done in replication and convergence in the original study and crunches them all. It disattenuates for unreliability, so different measurement problems, right, in a study. And then at the end of that, you go, all right, y'all, there was this study of 500 people, this study of 40 people, this study of 1,000 people. We crunched it all together. We did 200 studies representing 118,000 people in 30 different cultures, and we found this to be true, or this not to be true, whatever it is. When you get to the point of meta-analysis, as kind of a student trying to learn about something, you go, okay, that right there is probably true. It's probably true because it wasn't one study or two studies. It's a study of multiple studies drawing kind of high-level conclusions. The last step, the fun step, there's a journal in my field called the Journal of Management. Every year, for a long time, they do what's called a review article, a review issue. And so basically, they'll go to somebody who's an expert in an area, and they'll say, all right, we haven't looked at this topic, whatever it is, for 20 years. The example that comes to my mind is turnover, because I'm doing a paper on that right now. Turnover meaning like when people quit companies, why do they quit companies, stuff like that. Everyone thought it was money, and we get to, oh, well, theory shows us actually people leave jobs. People leave people. They don't leave jobs. They may save money. It's not usually money. It's usually a manager. It's usually coworker, culture, climate, stuff like that. So they would go to somebody who's an expert in turnover, and they would say, write a systematic review, meaning in one article, condense everything down, the entire field that you research, condense it down to one article, tell us what's real. What do we actually know that you're going to bet your career on, you're going to bet, your reputation on? Tell us what we know and tell us what we don't know. So that's a systematic review. That's often where I start. Like if I'm interested in learning about a topic, I'll say, okay, what's the most recent systematic review that's out there? Or what's the most recent meta-analysis that's out there? That'll bring all the converging perspectives and data points together. You'll have people who say the research in this field is no good. You hear them out. People who say the research in this area is bulletproof. You hear them out. So that's a good place to start. So at the end of this began with somebody seeing something they were interested in. And usually through years, it ends in, this is what everything we know about a particular topic. And that's where theory comes from. So at the end of this kind of theory formation process, we got a few things. For whatever the topic is, we have some main principles. We know this to be true. We know that when a leader does this, here's the result. We know that when you hire this kind of person, there's good or bad performance. We know this personality trait predicts this kind of performance on a job. Whatever it is, there's main principles. In addition, we have boundary conditions. Boundary conditions are like, here's when it doesn't work, or here's when it works better. There's a thing called a moderator. We won't get into it, but that gets in there. So here's the main ideas. But if you fall into one of these categories over here where it's either not tested yet or it has been tested and we know it's not true there, you fit under boundary conditions at that point. The main thing at this point that we have with theory is utility. Now we can use it. We're confident that this isn't just some crazy person's idea. We're confident it's not just an opinion. Because of all the research that has gone in, different viewpoints, like multi-source, multi-method approaches to answering the question, meta-analysis, systematic reviews. We go, all right, now we got something that we can actually use. Um, and in that way, theory is incredibly useful. It might be incredibly boring to read sometimes, but it's like reading a user manual for your lawnmower. If you don't understand what's in there, you're going to break the lawnmower. It's not going to work. Nobody loves reading the user manual, but if you get that information written by the engineer who designed it, super, super helpful. Kind of like that. So let me give you a quick example. A lot of people have heard of SMART goals, right? So every intro management, it doesn't matter, strategy, marketing, whatever, project management class. Oh, it's a nice goal, but is it a SMART goal? And you're like, oh, I don't want to hear that anymore. SMART goal, the term didn't exist for a long time. Its origins are in a thing called goal setting theory. So in my field, in the field of management, there was kind of a vote that happened many years ago, and it was what's the most useful theory in all of organizational behavior. Number one was goal setting theory. Number two was the job design model, job characteristics model. And number three was a thing called organizational behavior modification. So goal setting theory, very practical. 1969, 1971 is when it came out. A guy named Ed Locke wrote on it for his entire career. And now we just use it in common vernacular. Like you can hear it in almost every discipline, people talking about SMART goals without really knowing where that came from. So let's just kind of walk through this for a second. A goal should be specific. Nobody stops to explain why a goal should be specific. We just tell people, well, you need more specificity in your goals. Why is that? There's a whole theory on role ambiguity. That is, if people don't know what's expected of them, then they can't, if it's ambiguous to them, then they can't really perform well in their job. That's why we have specific goals. It's not specific goals because S is for, the S in SMART means specific. There's a whole theory, role ambiguity, there's a whole theory behind why goals need to be specific. Goals need to be measurable. Is that for managers so they can figure out who gets the bonus? Well, maybe, but a measurable goal that you can see progress toward fits in with a thing called salience theories. It means it's front in your mind because you can see the metric. If you can't see the metric, you don't know how close you are, how far you are, so it keeps it salient. The M is theory driven. Attainable goals. If you set unrealistic goals, you know this, it's common sense in some ways. If you set unrealistic goals, people are not going to be able to achieve them. If you set boring goals that are not challenging at all, people aren't going to have the motivation to achieve them. Do we just come up with that because the A in SMART stands for attain? No, it's a whole theory. Social learning theory gave birth to Albert Bandura wrote about self-efficacy for 30 years. Self-efficacy theory. If I have confidence that I can do something, I try harder to do it. If the goal is unattainable, if I don't have confidence, then I don't even try at all. So the A, the R, the T, all of them, they're all driven by theory. So in a sense, goal setting theory is informed by all of these other theories. And then when you sit in a boardroom and people are showing their dashboard of their metrics for each of the different business disciplines, here's where I'm at, here's where I'm going. Nobody knows. Nobody's sitting there thinking, well, this could be a threat to self-efficacy and we need to keep these metrics salient. Like nobody thinks like that. But if they didn't do it that way, informed by theory, then they wouldn't be anywhere nearly as successful. So that's what I mean by theory informing how we go about business. So that's a little bit about kind of how we get theory, and then how we use theory to build business functions like dashboards, like measuring success of different business disciplines. So a couple of skills you want to think about. Number one, develop the skill of theory acquisition. So the hope, the desire is that you would be able to go pick up an article. And I don't mean like just an HBR or something off of Forbes.com. I mean a real business article, something where somebody has tested a hypothesis. You'd be able to pick it up and go through it. You'd be able to know what you're looking for. So you don't just sit down and read the 40-page article. You go, why am I looking at this? Kind of begin with the end in mind. Know what you're looking for. You go, what are the hypotheses? How did they test it? Go right to the discussion. What did they learn? What are the limitations? So that's a skill. If you are, I'm thinking, my head's in HR right now, right? So you're an HR manager at a firm and your accounting person walks over to you and says, hey, we have a turnover problem here. Turnovers because of retraining, because of cost to replace, time to replace, lost productivity. We're losing a lot of money. I've costed it out. We're losing $1 million a year because our turnover rate is 12% and the industry average is 7%. What's going on? Well, what do you do at that point? You scratch your head and go, well, gee, I like my job. I'm not quitting. Maybe people don't like their jobs. Do you go ask some people, hey, exit interviews, hey, why'd you quit? Hey, why'd you quit? No, that's not where you start. You start by a systematic review of the turnover literature. So you can ask the question, why do people leave jobs? What are the main causes? What are the main solutions? It's been tested, right? 100,000 different people on hundreds and hundreds of studies. And everybody goes, yeah, but I'm different. And as a consultant, I go, yeah, actually, you're not that different. On average, people are average. So the skill of theory acquisition means you have the benefit of going to smart people who do good research, who write good stuff, and go, what have they found? Go to the expert, what have they found? And then you can lift it to point number 2 and say, how would that fit here? How does that apply to our situation here? 2 skills to hone in on. This was module 2. Have a great day.